Hey everyone, welcome. You ever grab a bottle of wine, you're about to pour a glass, and you see that little warning on the label, and you kind of wonder, what's that all about? Well, today we are uncorking the truth behind sulfites, probably one of the most misunderstood words in the entire world of wine. Yeah, you've seen it a million times, right? Contains sulfites. It sounds so serious, like some kind of modern chemical warning. But is it really the bad guy in your glass? Well, the answer might surprise you, because its story actually goes back thousands of years. I mean, this is not some newfangled chemical additive, no way. The use of sulfur in wine goes back thousands of years. We're talking Roman times. They would literally burn sulfur candles inside wine barrels to keep the wine from turning into straight-up vinegar. Now you fast forward 2,000 years, and that same basic element, just in the form of sulfur dioxide now, is still the single most important tool a winemaker has. Isn't that wild? Okay, so to really get what's going on in your wine, we have to get our terms straight. Because when we say sulfur, we're actually talking about a few different things that do totally different jobs. So let's break down this little sulfur family tree. So first up, you've got elemental sulfur. The easiest way to think about this is like the vineyard security guard. Growers will spray it right on the vines, and it protects the grapes from nasty stuff like mildew and rot. It's really that first line of defense, way out in the field. All right, next up are sulfides. Now, these are the troublemakers, the villains of the story. They can pop up during fermentation if things get a little low on oxygen, and trust me, you do not want them around. They're responsible for those really awful smells, like rotten eggs or burnt rubber. Winemakers work really hard to make sure these guys don't show up to the party. And that brings us to the star of our show today, sulfites. Specifically, sulfur dioxide, or SO2. This is the hero. Unlike those nasty sulfides, SO2 is the winemaker's best friend. It's intentionally added because it's an incredible preservative and antioxidant. It protects the wine, keeps it fresh, and this is what that label on the bottle is actually talking about. Okay, so we've established that SO2 is the good guy. But to really see how it works its magic, you have to understand that it has a kind of double life inside the bottle. It's not just one thing. It's split into two really important forms. And this is the most important part to get. Think of free SO2 as your active duty soldiers. They are on patrol 24/7, actively fighting off any oxygen or microbes that try to attack the wine. Then you have bound SO2. Think of them as the reserves. They've already done their job. They've attached themselves to other things in the wine like sugars or phenols. They're bound up, so they can't fight any new threats. They're out of the action. So when we talk about the total SO2 in a wine, it's just the sum of both the free and the bound parts. But what you gotta remember is that it's that smaller slice of the pie, the free SO2, that's doing all the heavy lifting, all the active protective work at any given moment. So here's the bottom line, the most crucial point of all this. Only the free SO2 actually has the power to protect the wine. That's it. That's the number that matters. So what are those superpowers exactly? What makes free SO2 so darn essential? Well, it turns out it's an incredible multitasker. It's basically juggling 4 critical jobs at once to protect the wine. It's got 4 key roles. First, it's anti-enzymatic, which means it stops the enzymes that make wine turn brown. Second, it's an antioxidant, so it prevents spoilage from oxygen. Third, it's antimicrobial. It kills off bad yeast and bacteria. And finally, it even helps stabilize the wine's color. I mean, it's a quadruple threat against anything that wants to ruin your wine. Okay, let's zoom in on that antioxidant power for a second. When wine gets exposed to oxygen without any protection, this nasty compound called acetaldehyde starts to form. And believe me, you do not want this stuff in your glass of Chardonnay. What does it do? Well, acetaldehyde gives the wine this kind of nutty, bruised apple aroma. You might have heard it described as a sherry-like smell. Now that's great if you're making sherry, but for most other wines, it's a huge flaw. It's a dead giveaway that the wine is oxidized and has lost all its freshness. But this is where our hero, SO2, swoops right in. The free SO2 gets to work, binding with these oxidation compounds, basically neutralizing them and stopping that spoilage process dead in its tracks. And that is what preserves all those beautiful, fresh fruit aromas the winemaker worked so hard to get in there in the first place. And get this, just look at how effective it is. A standard, normal addition of SO2 can shut down the activity of those browning enzymes by over 90%. That is a massive impact. It just shows you how powerful this tool is for keeping the wine looking and tasting great, right from the very beginning. Now, using SO2 isn't as simple as just, dumping some into the tank. Not at all. It's a precise science, a really delicate balancing act. And the secret ingredient that controls everything? It's the wine's pH. Here's the perfect way to think about it. A wine's pH acts like a volume knob for the power of SO2. So, depending on the pH, the exact same amount of SO2 can have a wildly different level of protective power. Just take a look at this. A wine with a low pH, like a super crisp Riesling, might only need about 20 parts per million of free SO2 to be totally protected. But now look at a red wine with a high pH. To get the exact same amount of protection, it needs 80 parts per million. That's 4 times as much. The higher the pH goes, the less effective the SO2 becomes, so you have to use more to get the job done. And this is why winemakers are so incredibly methodical about this. It's a constant cycle of testing and calculating. They'll analyze the current pH and the SO2 levels, they'll figure out their target for that specific style of wine, and then they use the pH to calculate the precise amount they need to add. It's real chemistry in action, all to make a beautiful, stable wine for us. All right. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. I know what you're thinking. This is the #1 question people have about sulfites, right? But what about the headaches? Okay, let's just put this into perspective for a second. Your average wine might have, 80 parts per million of sulfites? Now look at this, dried apricots. They can have over 1,000 parts per million. So many common foods, dried fruit, French fries, you name it, have way more sulfites than wine. So if you can snack on a handful of dried apricots and feel fine, it is highly unlikely that the tiny amount in your wine is what's causing your headache. So what is the real culprit then? Well, for most people, it's probably other compounds called biogenic amines, things like histamine. And here is the great irony. SO2 actually helps prevent the microbes that create these headache compounds in the first place. So a well-made wine with sulfites might actually have fewer of those nasty things than a wine made without them. Kind of flips the script, doesn't it? So, the next time you see contains sulfites on a wine label, I want you to stop thinking of it as a warning. Instead, think of it as a promise. It's the signature of the unsung hero in the bottle, the guardian that makes sure the wine you're about to pour is fresh, stable, and tastes exactly the way the winemaker wanted it to. It's what allows a delicate, living product like wine to travel across time and continents all the way to your glass. And for that, I think we can all raise a glass. Cheers!